Hey everyone, and welcome back to Speak More Fluently.
Hello. Great to be diving in again.
Yeah, another deep dive for you today. We're digging into some really interesting material again, stuff that helps us figure out how English really sounds when native speakers use it naturally.
Right. And our mission, as always, is to pull out those key insights, the things that can actually give you a bit of a shortcut to sounding more fluent and just, understanding English better.
Yeah.
Faster, even.
Absolutely. And this time we're zooming in on something that's almost like invisible if you grew up speaking English, but it makes a huge difference if you're learning. It's those word pairs that just sound, why is it strong coffee? Why not powerful coffee?
Exactly. Or heavy rain instead of, say, thick rain.
Yeah.
It's all about the specific partnerships between adjectives and nouns. They show up together really often, and they sound completely natural. We've been looking through the material to sort of decode why these combinations work so well.
And here's the thing. Here's why you really want to pay attention to this. Getting a handle on these pairings, it's like unlocking a new level in your English fluency. Seriously. It helps your brain process English way faster when you're reading or listening. And crucially, it makes your own speaking and writing sound so much more native-like, more confident. So stick with us, because by the end of this chat, you'll have some really clear ways to spot these patterns and, start using them yourself. Let's jump in.
Okay, so first things first. What exactly are we talking about here? We're looking at what linguists often call collocations. Specifically today, it's adjective plus noun collocations.
Right.
These aren't just any words that could technically go together. They're words that very, very often do go together, and they sound, just right to a native speaker.
Like deep sleep or maybe sharp knife. You could say profound sleep, I guess, or pointed knife, but
They just don't sound as common, do they?
no, exactly. Collocations are the usual suspects, the words that are kind of best friends, always hanging out together.
That's a good way to put it. And understanding why they're so important, beyond just sounding natural, was a really key thing we pulled from the material. One massive reason is comprehension. How quickly you understand.
Oh, this is fascinating. So the idea is your brain starts treating these common pairs almost like one single block of meaning.
Pretty much, yeah. So when you hear heavy traffic, boom,
Yeah.
your brain gets the concept instantly.
Right.
But if someone said, I don't know, big traffic, even though you know big and you know traffic, there's like this tiny little hesitation while your brain goes, okay, I guess I know what they mean.
Yeah, it's not automatic.
Exactly. That little pause means you're processing word by word instead of chunk by chunk. Recognizing collocations lets your brain grab onto phrases much faster when you're reading or listening. It just makes everything feel smoother, quicker.
And I bet that smoothness translates directly to speaking as well.
Oh, absolutely. 100%. When you have these pairs locked and loaded in your head, you don't have that awkward pause where you're searching, what's the right adjective for food that's quick?
Right, you just think fast food.
Exactly. Or sharp knife. Or maybe bitter medicine. That automatic recall. It cuts out those hesitations and makes your speech just flow much more naturally.
So it's not just about having a big vocabulary list. It's about knowing which words actually team up well.
Precisely. Knowing the network, not just the nodes. And it's not just for speaking either. It really impacts your writing style. Think about the difference between, say, she made a strong decision versus she made a firm decision.
Strong decision isn't wrong exactly.
No, not technically wrong, but firm decision is, a much more common and often sort of preferred collocation, especially if you're writing something a bit more considered, like an essay or a formal email. Using these pairings just makes your writing feel more polished, more proficient.
Yeah, it sounds more like authoritative or established. Correct.
It does.
Yeah.
And there's another really key point here. Learning words in these pairs actually helps you build your vocabulary more solidly.
How so?
Well, when you learn the pair thick fog, for example, you're not just learning thick and fog in isolation. You're learning that fog is often described using the word thick.
Oh, okay.
It gives context to both words. It anchors their meaning together, making them easier to remember and, crucially, easier to use correctly later on.
So it's like building this web of word connections in your brain instead of just separate lists. That feels way more powerful for actually using the language. Okay, so we get why they're so important. Comprehension, fluency, writing, vocabulary building. But how do you even start to get a handle on them? There must be thousands.
There are many, yeah, but it's not as overwhelming as it sounds if you start looking for patterns. What we saw in the material is that these collocations often fall into logical categories,
Okay.
and seeing them grouped together, maybe by theme, can make them feel much more manageable, easier to spot, easier to learn.
Right, like organizing them. What kind of categories are we talking about?
Well, there are loads, but a few really common ones jump out. One big one is how we describe emotion and feeling. We tend to use quite specific adjectives here.
Okay, like what?
Think about deep sadness, or sheer joy, or maybe bitter disappointment. Notice how it's usually deep sadness, not often strong sadness,
Oh, yeah.
And bitter disappointment feels quite specific, not just harsh disappointment.
Yeah, bitter disappointment. You instantly know that specific feeling. Those are really good examples. What about, like, physical stuff? Size or measurements?
Yep, that's another category. Size and measurement. Loads of common pairings there, too. We talk about a wide variety of things or a narrow street.
Right, you wouldn't usually say a big variety.
Exactly. Or maybe vast majority. These are pretty standard ways to describe those concepts.
Okay. And how we talk about how good or bad something is. Quality.
Spot on. That's quality and degree. And this is where collocations really help us be more precise. Instead of just saying good service, which is fine, obviously.
Yeah, it's okay, but a bit bland.
Right. You might say excellent service or outstanding service. Or on the other end, poor quality, shoddy workmanship, or maybe flawless performance. They add much more nuance than just generic words like good or bad.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
And I feel like there are some categories where the pairs are really, really fixed. Like you almost have to use that specific word. Weather, maybe. Temperature.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
The category of temperature and weather has some of the most rigid collocations out there. It's almost always heavy rain, isn't it? Not usually hard rain or strong rain.
Yeah, heavy rain feels right.
And extreme heat is often called scorching heat, not just burning heat. And extreme cold is typically bitter cold. These pairs are incredibly tightly linked. You pretty much need to use them to sound natural when talking about the weather.
Okay, wow. Seeing them broken down like that into themes definitely makes it feel less like just this huge random list. You can start seeing the logic within those groups. But even knowing the categories, it still feels easy to make mistakes. What are some common traps people fall into?
Yeah, good question. One of the biggest ones, especially if English isn't your first language, is trying to translate word pairs literally from your own language.
Ah, yeah, I can see that.
So maybe in your language you use a word that means bright to describe an interesting book. You might be tempted to say bright book in English.
Which sounds odd.
Right. The natural English collocations would be something like fascinating book or just interesting book. You're applying one language's logic onto another.
So what's the fix for that? Just stop translating.
But that's easier said than done. A really practical tip here is to keep a journal or even just a note on your phone. When you hear or read a pair in English that sounds good, that sounds natural, write it down.
Actively collect them.
Exactly. Build your own list of correct English pairings rather than relying on translation or guessing.
That's smart. Active learning. What else trips people up?
Another common one is just relying too heavily on really generic adjectives. Good, bad, nice. They're useful, sure, but overuse makes your language sound a bit basic, maybe even childish sometimes.
Okay.
So instead of always saying good chance, think about the context. Is it an excellent chance? Or maybe just a fair chance? Instead of nice view, could you say a stunning view or a breathtaking view?
Right. Pushing yourself to be more specific.
Exactly. Using those stronger, more precise collocations just elevates your language and, again, makes it sound more natural, more descriptive.
It adds that color and detail we talked about. And I guess this precision is even more important in, like, formal writing, essays, emails.
Oh, absolutely. You probably wouldn't write, "We made a big mistake" in a formal report.
No, sounds too casual.
Right. The natural, more formal collocations there would be grave mistake or serious mistake. So taking that extra second to pause and think, is there a better, more standard pairing here?
Yeah.
Can really lift the quality and professionalism of your writing.
So it's about awareness, really, and maybe checking sometimes. Okay, so once you're aware and you're trying to avoid those pitfalls, how do you actually learn these things effectively? And more importantly, how do you start using them?
Great question. The material suggested some really practical strategies. The first one we already touched on. Notice and record. Be an active listener, an active reader.
The detective work.
Exactly. When you're watching a movie, listening to something like this, reading an article, pay attention. When a pair jumps out at you, like maybe ripe opportunity or speed price.
Jot it down.
Yep. Build that personal collection. Second strategy, Make use of resources like collocation dictionaries. There are books and great online tools for this.
Yeah. How do they work?
You can look up a noun you're interested in, say, weather, and the dictionary or tool will show you a list of adjectives that commonly collocate with it. So for weather, it might list severe, unpredictable, ideal, mild, terrible, glorious.
That's super useful for checking if a pair you thought of sounds right, or for discovering new ones.
Exactly. It's a fantastic discovery tool.
Yeah.
Then the third idea is about organizing what you find, maybe using themed flashcards.
Right, like grouping them by those categories we discussed, emotion, size, weather.
Precisely. Instead of just having a random jumble of pairs, learning them in themed sets helps you internalize the patterns within those specific areas. Makes memorization feel more focused, less chaotic.
Okay, so notice, record, check with dictionaries, organize by theme. That covers the learning part, but the crucial bit is actually using them right. Otherwise, they just stay on the flashcard.
Absolutely critical. Passive knowledge only gets you so far. You have to activate it. You need to practice using these collocations in context. Well, the material suggested things like writing mini dialogues or short paragraphs. So if you're working on weather words, write a tiny conversation. Did you see the forecast? Looks like heavy rain all afternoon. Ugh, I was hoping for mild weather.
Oh, I like that. It forces you to actually construct a sentence around it. Much better than just reciting heavy rain, heavy rain.
Totally. Or you could write a short descriptive paragraph, maybe describe a place you visited, and consciously try to weave in pairs you've learned, like crystal clear water or steep climb if you're talking about a hike.
Makes sense, putting them into action.
Exactly. And if you're lucky enough to have a language partner or tutor, practice through role plays. Plan a pretend trip together. Discuss a news story, review a movie, whatever the scenario. Try to naturally bring in the relevant collocations you've been collecting and organizing. That act of retrieving and using them in a simulated real-life way, that's what really cements them in your memory.
So it's this whole cycle. Spot them, note them down, maybe organize them, check them if you need to, and then critically find ways to actively use them in ways that feel like real communication.
That's the core loop, absolutely.
Yeah.
And seeing them in action helps too. We looked at some sample text, like a restaurant review, a bit from a travel blog, a weather report, just to see how these pairs appear naturally.
And what did that show?
It just reinforces how they make the language sound authentic and engaging. You know, in the restaurant review, you'd see phrases like cozy warmth, excellent service, maybe vibrant flavor. These specific pairings just paint a much clearer picture than vague words.
Right. It shows they're not just some weird grammar rule. They're actually how people talk and write. They make the language richer.
Exactly. Now, one final quick point the material brought up. While using collocations is fantastic, you also want to avoid overusing the exact same ones again and again and again.
Okay. Like, don't just say excellent service every single time you talk about service.
Right. Once you're comfortable with excellent service, maybe branch out. Learn if outstanding service or superb service are also common pairings for that noun.
Use synonyms for the adjective, basically, if they also collocate.
Yes, provided they are common collocations too. That keeps your language varied. Or you can combine the collocation with other descriptive phrases. It's about finding that balance between naturalness and richness or variety.
This has been incredibly useful. It really feels like focusing specifically on these adjective-noun partnerships gives you such a concrete, manageable way to improve how natural and fluent you sound.
It really is one of the most direct routes, I think.
Yeah.
The biggest takeaway truly is that consciously learning and actively using these common pairings, the heavy rain, the deep sadness, the firm decision, the excellent service type patterns, it directly helps you sound more natural, more confident in English, both when you're trying to understand others and when you're expressing yourself.
And the way forward seems pretty clear. Become a bit of a collocation collector. Notice them when you listen and read, jot them down, maybe group them, and then make a real effort to practice using them. Check them with a dictionary if you're unsure.
Yep. If you do that consistently, it will reduce that hesitation, that searching for words. It'll make your communication feel smoother. And honestly, it's a huge confidence booster across the board. Reading, listening, speaking, writing.
So here's something for you, the listener, to think about as you go about your day. When you hear English, when you read it, when you speak it, start paying attention. How does noticing these specific word friendships, these collocations, not only improve your English, but maybe also change how you hear and appreciate the little details, the subtle nuances in the way other people use the language around you?
That's great fun.
Give it a try. Start noticing those pairs today.